This is why I love this hobby. This case, or piece of art rather, is not what you typically think of when you think of a PC chassis. It's something completely different. It's the result of brilliant engineering, design, and just a clear passion for small form factor PCs. And it's unlike any case that I've used before. Now, every detail is thought out, from the specific channels of airflow that appropriately reach each component to the incredibly thick and high quality CNC'd machine aluminum alloy. But you can practically hear just how high quality it is when you're putting it all together. And of course, this continuation in design language from the Asus ProArt GPU. The entire design is based off of this card. It's the centerpiece and the inspiration standing front and center. Monumental on your desk, while at the same time taking up only a small footprint. A 4080 Super paired with the fastest gaming CPU on the market, this thing is fucking awesome. And really expensive. But hey, beauty is pain, right? So let's build this thing and see what kind of performance and thermals we can get out of it. Now for the CPU, I'm going to be using everyone's favorite, the Ryzen 7 7800 X3D, and for a couple of reasons. One, it's the fastest gaming CPU, but you probably already know that. Two, because of its efficiency. This CPU is fast and it runs at a relatively low power consumption, which in turn makes it easier to keep cool. And our case here can only support a low profile CPU cooler. Now it's recommended to use the ID Cooling IS67XT, so that's what I'm going with. Now from what I can tell, you can use basically any mini ITX board here. The one I've got is from Asus. It's the Strix B650EI, a well-balanced board in terms of price and features in my opinion, and a personal favorite of mine. And I'm also going to be pairing that up with a 32 gig set of RAM from Team Group. Now, like I said earlier, it's recommended that you use an ID Cooling IS67XT with this case. Now, the heat dissipation is set up to support down pressure air coolers up to 67 millimeters in height. I was only able to get the white one, as that was the only one in stock when I purchased this, so I'm actually going to replace the fan with a black one from Noctua. Okay, now that the motherboard is prepped, let's take a look at the build process. It comes out of the crate fully assembled, so we're actually going to need to take it apart. We've got a couple of screws cleverly hidden away under this top panel, which is magnetically attached. All of the pieces are held together by screws in this top piece, and then another set on the bottom side in the base. If you do end up getting this, you will need to make sure you pick up a long and thin 2mm hex driver so that you can reach the screws in the base. Now once those are removed, all the pieces can come apart. This bar actually houses the power button and the front I/O, and you can actually see some of the channels that allow for the heat from the GPU to escape. Some earlier versions of this case had more USB, but it looks like the final version here is USB-C only. Now I'm personally fine with just a single USB-C, but I do know some people would have appreciated the previous version which had a lot more. Especially considering all of your ports are going to be underneath, which is not easily accessible. Now, the plus side of having the motherboard facing down like this is that it does nicely hide away any of the cable mess, but it does come at the cost of convenience. Now, for the GPU, of course, this case is completely designed around the ProArt cards. As far as I understand, all the options range from 4070 up to a 4080 Super. The one I have here is the 4080 Super. If you're going to be spending this kind of money on a case, you might as well go all out on the GPU too, right? Now, if a case is going to be designed around a single GPU, I think that this is a good one to go with. These have been more easily available. There are a few price points to choose from depending on what tier card you go for, and for a 4080 Super, it's one of the smaller ones you can get. It's also incredibly good looking. The shroud is made of a matte black powder coated metal, which the case was also created to match that finish perfectly. I don't think that would have worked out as well if the shroud had been made of plastic instead. Now, it should be obvious at this point, but let's just say it out loud now. This is not a case that you buy with the expectation of GPU upgradability every few years. That's just not what this is. Now, there is always the chance that the exact design and dimensions of Asus's ProArt cards don't change with the next generation of GPUs, but I really would not count on it or buy this with that expectation. And if you're asking yourself, why the hell would you buy a case that you can't upgrade the GPU? You might be missing the point. Now, there are a ton of truly great case options if upgradability is a high priority, and those cases will actually be a lot less expensive as well. This isn't meant to be a mass market product, at least I don't think it is. I personally view this as a showpiece and a snapshot in time. A luxury item for enthusiasts in this space to use now, and when the hardware becomes outdated, hey, it's a piece of engineering art for later. Now, mounting the GPU is a little different than a typical case as well. First, we need to remove the I/O shield from the card. Then on the base of the case, there are these precise cutouts that match the I/O shield perfectly. So we can actually slide the card into the riser cable, align the card with those cutouts, then secure the GPU. Very clean, and definitely something you would only be able to do when you have only one GPU to account for. Now, this was also created to work only with the Asus ROG low-key power supplies as well, and for a few reasons. First, the case includes custom length power cables, one of which is pre-routed through one of the mounting brackets on the GPU. The CPU and motherboard cables are also at that perfect length, so there's adequate space for cable management, as there's really not going to be a whole lot of room to stuff extra slack that would come with these standard ones. Now, mounting the power supply is unlike any power supply installation I've ever seen. You actually remove the fan grill and install these two brackets, one of which has that 12-volt high power cable routed, as I mentioned earlier. The end of that cable has an angled adapter. This perfectly aligns with the GPU power connector, so that when the power supply slides on this rail system and locks into position, it also snaps the power connector to the GPU. The fan also faces on the inside, but there's a dedicated channel through the middle of the case that gives the power supply its own access to fresh air. And because that fan is RGB, there's a really neat light effect that you can see when you peer into the channel. Now, all it's left to do is plug in the two remaining power connectors, USB-C and the power button. And at this point, I actually realized that I made a small mistake. The CPU cooler actually needs to be rotated 180 degrees in order to fit properly. So now that that's fixed, we can actually start piecing everything back together. The 7800X3D is a very efficient CPU, especially if playing games at 4K. I see no issues keeping it cool with the IS67XT. After playing a few rounds of the finals, CPU temps are hanging in the lower 60s. Now, putting it through a worst case scenario with a 10-minute multi-core stress test in Cinebench 2024, it did max out at 79 degrees, but it averaged around 77. Now, testing a very graphically intensive game, this is Black Myth Wukong at 4K, cinematic settings, with DLSS set at quality and frame generation off. The GPU temps stayed in the lower 70s. Now, putting the GPU through a worst case scenario, I ran firm-arc for around 15 minutes, and the GPU maxed out at 75 degrees, but averaged around 73 to 74. I also noticed the loudest fan noise during this test. So without an enclosure helping muffle the GPU fan noise, they are more audible here. My decibel meter was picking them up at around 49 decibels. And I found that the fan noise was louder during this stress test than actually in-game. And luckily, there's really no annoying pitch. It sounds similar to an air purifier. I've been pretty fortunate enough to build in some very high quality cases on this channel, but nothing quite as unique as this. Now, it is $700 for the case, which is, very, very expensive, but you can at least see why. It's not a mass market product. You're not going to see this level of quality and machining in a typical case. This is an enthusiast luxury item. If you're interested in getting one, they just launched a new website where you can pick it up. As you might have noticed, I have a passion for small PCs. So this to me is like peak small form factor PC. The level of precision, the attention to the smallest details, and just how perfectly everything fits together. It's a symbol for why I love this hobby so much. Intentional, beautiful design without compromising performance. And I just think it's a work of art. Anyway, let me know what you guys think about it. Thank you so much for watching.